Friday politics now, lots to talk about. Tonight, CTV pollster Nik Nanos, principal of Nanos Research, joins us from Ottawa. Nick, let's start with the obvious, which is the Prime Minister coming home with the trade deal to wave around. They'll certainly be happy on the farms in Western Canada. Atlantic lobster fishermen certainly pleased with the reduction in tariffs. Ontario manufacturers, the auto sector in particular, will not be. How does the government play this?
Well, I think the government is hoping that it plays well because, you know what, Todd, you look at the national numbers, it's still like 39-36. It's not like there's a big advantage for the Liberals. The Conservatives and Liberals are, for all intents and purposes, still within the margin of error. Yes, you know, Carney does have an advantage over Pierre Poilievre, but when it comes to actual Canadians voting, it's not big. The Liberals are probably hoping that this helps them pull away from the Conservatives because it'll show that the Prime Minister is trying to do something. He's not making headway with the United States, and as a result, it looks like the Carney Liberals are focusing specifically on China as the other big economic player in order to help Western farmers, Atlantic Canadian commercial fishermen in the lobster industry, and to try to jumpstart a trade relationship that has been on the ropes for about 8 years with China.
Well, and let's face it, and they're two big players, the United States and China. If you're going to lose with one, you better make up a bit with the other. Is that their view?
I think that's their view. And, you know, the thing is for Canada, we've got to basically do business with everyone. I think what we've learned is that through the stress with the United States, it's proven to us that we only have so much leverage, that we can't be dependent on any one country as a trading partner. Yes, the U.S. will continue to be a very important partner for Canada, but we have to look to diversify. China has to be at the top of the list. India has to be part of that. Europe has to be part of that. And I think what we've seen is a foray of Mark Carney into China to try to warm relationships that have really been on ice for the last number of years.
Well, it was interesting. I think everybody was kind of on tenterhooks thinking, you know, how would U.S. President Donald Trump respond to this? And this afternoon he said, well, if Canada can make a deal with China, they should take it. I think that may have surprised a few people. But look, it wasn't long ago, Nick, that, you know, it was very recent history that China was called Canada's greatest security threat. We even had an inquiry into foreign interference. What about all that?
You know, it's interesting, Todd, when we did polling, we asked Canadians whether China should be a priority, a trade priority for Canada. And at its lowest ebb, I think it was like 5%. 1 out of every 20 Canadians thought China should be a priority. That's when we were dealing with the two Michaels and the Huawei executive and all that kind of stuff, when it was really bad. Well, fast forward, throw in Donald Trump, 51st state, the USMCA up in the air, and, you know, that 5% has increased to 35%. 35% of Canadians thinking that China should be a trade priority. And I don't think this has anything to do with what China has done. It has everything to do with what Donald Trump has done. And it looks like it's created an opportunity for the Canadian government and the Chinese government to open a dialogue and try to build and rebuild that trade relationship that has been on the ropes for such a long time.
So what do you do if you're in the auto sector and you've seen this 49,000, which is not necessarily a huge number, 49,000 cars coming in at a low tariff from China? Does that pinch the auto industry, or, you know, how's that going to play out?
I think if you're a manufacturer, it does put stress on you. I think if you're a member of the United Auto Workers, you're probably thinking, are there going to be any jobs that come with these electric vehicles? That if Canada does allow China to play more in the Canadian automotive market, will there be jobs that follow? And actually, I think that's a valid question. Yeah. You know, it looks like what we need to do is to connect our trade to jobs. So yes, this is probably a first step in terms of making it a little easier for some electric vehicles from China to come in. But I think for a lot of Canadians, they'll be like, okay, like, where are the jobs? Because you know what? If we don't have jobs, there won't be people to buy these electric vehicles.
Yeah, well, yeah, very good point. Okay, let me do a left turn here. The Federal Court of Appeal just held up a ruling that the Liberal government did not have reasonable grounds to invoke the Emergency Act 4 years ago. Your response to that, how do you think that'll be met? What does the government do with that?
Well, I think luckily this isn't the Trudeau government, because if it was, it would be a major problem.
Yeah.
It's probably Todd, why don't we just put this as another example where Mark Carney, if he wants to, can throw Justin Trudeau under the bus once again for something that he's done that he might not have agreed with or he doesn't think is good politics. And I would expect that Carney will say, hey, that was them. The Carney government is a different government. Yeah. He's not going to defend what's happened in the past.
Okay. Pierre Poilievre was just in Nova Scotia, and he was in Yarmouth, the riding of former Conservative turned Liberal Chris d'Entremont. It's understood now that the federal Conservatives would like to get cozier with Nova Scotia and Ontario, the governments in those provinces. Is that something they have to do?
Well, I think that's something they should have always done. You know, the Conservatives have always done better federally when they're provincial counterparts. You think of Peter Lougheed and Brian Mulroney, for example, and, you know, you think of Bill Davis and, you know, all those, when the provincial premiers, when the provincial party premiers work with their federal counterparts, whether they're Liberal or Conservative, it's good for the party. So for Pierre Poilievre to work to mend fences and build bridges with the Nova Scotia government, you know, with the Alberta government, you know, even though they're not technically Conservatives, they're UCP, but also with the Ontario government is critical. And, you know, the thing is, we have to remember that the Premier of Nova Scotia and the Premier of Ontario have a very strong political and personal friendship. Building bridges with the Nova Scotia Premier is the gateway to Ontario from a political point of view for Pierre Poilievre.
Even though Tim Houston has gone to great lengths to tell everybody who will listen that he's not a Conservative, he's, in fact, progressive Conservatives, and there is a difference. So it'll be interesting to see how that warms up, if it does at all. Nik Nanos, always appreciate your perspective. Thank you very much.
Take it easy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. We'll take a break. We'll be back with much more of your newscast.